Thousands of people dream of becoming a game developer. Getting paid to build worlds, tell stories, and experiment with new technologies. It takes a small army to bring a game to life, including concept artists, level designers, quest designers, QA analysts, 3D animators, producers, and more. However, jobs that combine creativity and passion are few and far in between. Game development has always been a difficult field to enter, and in today's landscape of company acquisitions, private equity, and larger publishers and developers laying off thousands of workers, independent developers are becoming more prevalent. These indie developers are changing the gaming landscape and gifting us game after impressive game. Neil Jones, aka Aerial Knight, is one of these developers who decided to do his own thing. After having trouble finding a place for himself in an arguably hostile industry, Neil decided to just make what he wanted to make. Having released 2 games in his Never Yield series, Neil is getting ready to release DropShot, his 3rd game. Neil invited me to collaborate with him on a video detailing troubles with publishers, issues finding funding, new games on the horizon, and things independent developers face that most of the public doesn't know about. Through multiple online conversations, interviews, and even a trip to Ohio to meet up at GDEX 2025, I got to know Neil and his story with the video game industry, learning how it all shaped up and what it means to him to have a community and a fan base that supports his work. This is the history of Aerial Knight. Neil Jones, aka Aerial Knight, was born and raised in Detroit by his grandma. Neil's grandmother ran multiple businesses, one of which included a restaurant that had an arcade, so Neil was always around video games. He even played Sega Genesis with his grandma when he was young.
Grew up in the heart of Detroit, raised by my grandmother. She ran a restaurant within a bowling alley that had an arcade, and I used to grab the quarters out the machine and just go to the arcade and chill there all day. She had a Sega Genesis and she played Bejeweled. And I would sit there and play with her and watch her play, and she would let me have a turn. It was weird for a grandma to have a Sega Genesis, but it was really cool. So I think that was my first experience, but that was her console. My first console that that was mine, was a Game Boy. Just play Pokemon nonstop. Playing video games, keeping to myself, and video games is all I ever wanted to do. My grandma's still around, very annoying, old lady who don't like to listen to nobody. Very independent person to just handle business, take care of stuff herself, and I get everything from her, so I owe her all of it.
In middle school, Neil would meet a would-be lifelong friend, Dan. The two became closer years later when they both ended up going to a for-profit school, which is where Neil's journey into game development began.
The first time I met Dan was in middle school. We're in the same school, and we realized this way afterwards, but we weren't friends in the school. We just happened to be in the same school. And then when I went to that for-profit school, that's when I met Dan again, and we were in a couple of classes together. We would go out to lunch together just because it was very convenient. He stayed down the street from me, so I would give him a ride home, give him a ride to school. So it was a friendship out of convenience.
Neil and Dan would continue to be friends and talk every day post-graduation, even after Neil was accepted into the University of Texas and become a part of the inaugural class, Dennius Sam's Gaming Academy, which was led by none other than Warren Spector, legendary game designer behind games such as System Shock and Deus Ex. Although it was a pretty big deal, it wasn't really Neil's cup of tea.
Everyone a part of that program knows how I felt about it. Warren, I looked up to him so much, and all the things that he done and all the advice and what he was trying to do, and it was a really good idea, but the culture shock of it all. Everyone wasn't used to the different people from different places, especially me. You can't throw a bunch of random ingredients into a pot and think that it's gonna taste good. I think that's kind of what happened with that program. Looking back, I'm really glad I did it. It was a good experience to see how far off of the path of, what the normal game industry person kind of vibes like, and the culture of that person to my culture and where I come from and how I talk. So I learned a lot about how to make adjustments to make sure I'm not doing too much.
After all of that, Neil still wasn't able to find a job in the games industry. Even though he'd done contract work, built up his resume, even became a camp counselor for Girls Make Games, nothing was coming through. The one thing that Neil wanted to do out of everything was make video games, so why wasn't that happening? There isn't one specific answer, unfortunately. The industry is hard to break into, and the market is saturated, in quotes, with people wanting to make video games. After leaving UT and the Warren Spector program, Neil wanted to work with his friends. His experience with a melting pot of people had influenced his idea that working with like-minded people was the best way to go. In comes Dan, once again, and in 2015, Neil and Dan founded Dead Art Games. Dead Art's first game? A title by the name of Click. Described as a dual story told through the perspectives of the young teenage girl and the avatar character within the game, Click was posted on Kickstarter on April 5th, 2016, after being in development for over a year. Neil served as lead artist, Dan served as the level and sound designer, and they also hired a community manager, DeAndre. The game ended up getting over 300 backers, a Polygon article, and raised over $15,000, targeting PS4, Xbox One, and PS Vita. There seemed to be a lot of hype behind a game that's main goal was to provide a unique insight into African American culture. That $15,000, however, wasn't even half of the goal, and overall wasn't the best experience for Neil.
We made this game called Click, and it was about this little girl who tried to escape her problems by playing a video game. So it was like a game within a game, and it was just a adventure game, kind of like Zelda, and it was just kind of the first thing that we made. When I was in Texas, I felt very left out of a lot of things, and I felt like everyone had their own little cliques. And then this game was like this one character who also felt left out, trying to break those evil cliques and like be a part of them and like have them, you know, combine. And it was a very weird game. It's hard to describe, and that's probably why it didn't work out. But yeah, just trying to get all of these people who separate themselves to combine and be one giant team rather than a bunch of separate individual cliques. It wasn't the best experience just because there was so much marketing that went behind it, and it ended up failing. So it kind of burnt us a little bit. And Kickstarter actually takes a big cut of whatever money you raise.
Unfortunately, Click would never see the light of day, but that wouldn't stop Neil from trying his hand at making games. Years later, after working a few different jobs, including becoming an adjunct professor of 3D art, Neil released his first title under his new moniker, Aerial Knight. Aerial Knight's first game, Murder the Reaper, released on itch.io on February 8, 2018.
Murder the Reaper was a really weird game where I was just playing with mechanics at that point. I was trying to do something so different with a puzzle game and like this weird Pac-Man-like game. I give myself a couple months to make this and see what it's like. And no, some people liked it. I never intended to charge for it or anything like that, so I just threw it up on the internet for free, and people seem to be cool with that. Murder Reaper was never finished. I just made 10 levels and, you know, I hit my allotted time for that game. So I just kind of posted it. So it was never anything that was done.
That allotted time bit is important to Neil, as it would be shown with his next title, Ashes to Ashes.
At the time I was 29, I was turning 30, and I just felt like I wasn't making any progress in the game industry. So I kind of just wanted to make a game within a year to give myself one last shot to say, hey, if people like this by the end of this year, I would continue trying to make games. But if not, I really need to move on with my life and like find a job that can pay bills and get me moving forward.
Working at a tennis club, Neil and Dan continued to talk and throw ideas back and forth, trying to figure out what games they wanted to make. Eventually, Neil would decide on an idea.
So Never Yield came out of me wanting to make something myself because I didn't have any funding or money to hire people. And if anybody worked for me, I wanted to pay them somehow. So I designed a game that I could make without anybody else's help. The most reasonable game that I can think of was Sonic-like Runner. And then I wanted to make it different somehow. So I said I was going to add a story and cut scenes and really funky music to kind of like help it stand out.
Ashes to Ashes was set to be Aerial Knight's latest and potentially last game released. A runner-style game, Ashes to Ashes' story was initially a lot darker and more mature than the final product. With the help of Dan and other friends' feedback, Neil wound up going in a different direction though.
You know, while I was kind of coming up with it, Dan was sitting there right next to me, and he was throwing ideas back and forth for me and helping me through that process. So yeah, I was working on it for a couple months before reaching out to Dan and other people to kind of like help me figure out what it was actually going to be now that they can play it. I would tell people about the story that I was coming up with and just like the theming around it. And they were, you know, say that was cool. You can tell by people's reaction if they're excited for something or not. And it just seemed like it wasn't it. I knew for sure once I changed the name, and I told Dan, because it was like one morning he came into the job, he had walked by me and I was like, I want to name it this. He was like, yeah, that's way better. So then I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing some stuff wrong. I need to kind of make adjustments.
While working on Ashes to Ashes, which had now become Never Yield, Neil was asked to join a project titled Dot's Home, a game that ended up becoming inspired by Neil's grandmother.
It was hilarious. Hilarious for a lot of weird reasons. They went to a lot of other people before they found me to work on Dot's Home, and they didn't have the story, they didn't have concept, they just knew they wanted to make a game about redlining in a city. And I started becoming a no person because I was the only person in the room who had any development experience. So they would come out with all these wild ideas and I would say, absolutely not. There's no way we can do that, especially with the budget that you all have. So I was more of the realist, the elder, when it came to actually making the game, which was very different for me. It was really nice to talk to a lot of writers and kind of giving them more context of how I would make things and the team I was trying to build to kind of like put this thing together. At the end of the day, it came together really great, and it's something I like looking at.
Through not only Dot's Home, but his continued development with Never Yield, Neil continued to shape his own personal design choices. Although the original game doc for Never Yield was a lot moodier and had a seemingly darker narrative, Neil ended up focusing more on gameplay rather than story.
My ranking is like, number one, it needs to be fun. Number two, it needs to look cool for other people watching you play. And then number three, story and like the depth. Some people put all that on the same line. Me, I have to rank it. Just in my mind, I need to have something that's number one. And like people finding it fun is the most important, because I can play an ugly game that has no story or has no depth, but I can't play a really pretty game that's not fun, you know?
Though the main character of Never Yield didn't really change much through development, Neil ended up making the game more stylized, more saturated, and eventually brought on Dan to help with the sound design and music. Keeping with this overall design philosophy of making a game fun first, he also didn't really nail down the story until he was deep in development.
I was coming up with the story as I was going. So I had the general concept of why he was doing what he was doing. Whenever it got stale, I tried to do something to mix it up. So in the middle of the game, you run into your brother. And that came from me needing to reuse old assets. And I saw this old thing where in Mortal Kombat, Scorpion, Sub-Zero was just a color change and they got to keep the same moves and things like that. It was a way for me to reuse the character, reuse old levels to show that, you know, this is what the other character's doing at this point in time, to try to extend the game and make it feel a little bit fresh and a little bit different. And I changed up the new character's moves just a little bit so he felt a little different. So there's a lot of game dev tricks that I tried for the first time. Yeah, I was inspired by so many things, like old school action movies where, you know, the hero's just running down the street to try to get to the next checkpoint or whatever in the story. Sonic and No More Heroes, all types of old movies and animes to kind of, you know, feed off of. As it evolved, I cranked the saturation up. I changed the camera angles more and more so it wasn't so flat. I added in mini cutscenes within the levels to kind of mix it up so it also didn't feel 2D. There's a lot of things that kind of changed and updated. The only thing that never really changed was the main character. I didn't change how he looked or anything like that.
As Neil continued to work on the game, COVID, of course, hit. Neil had to start taking care of his grandma. He was still working as an adjunct professor and working on Dot's Home. And by the time he was tying everything up, he started working with the publisher for Never Yield. Eventually, Neil got things in a good spot in terms of development, and on August 31st, the announcement trailer was officially released. Afterwards, someone at Nintendo must have seen the trailer and asked for it to be a part of their April Indie World, which would lead to Never Yield being a breakout success. Though Neil would recall how it felt like another thing added on to his already long list of duties to get the game ready for release, the trailer and Neil's video received mostly positive praise.
Hi, I'm Neil. I go by Aerial Knight online, and I'm the creator and developer of Aerial Knight's Never Yield.
a narrative runner that captures the spirit of classic games in the genre, but with a few new features and a lot of style. I created this game in Detroit to make space for myself in the game industry, which previously refused to make space for me, and with the help of some of my amazing friends who created something that represents much more. I'm proud to announce that Aerial Knights Never Yield will be coming to Nintendo Switch, which means you can free run your way to victory to the beat of a dope soundtrack at home or on the go. Please enjoy this look at Aerial Knights Never Yield.
Finally, a release date of May 19th was announced, with a demo of the game hitting Nintendo Switch the same day as the Indie World, April 14th, 2021. However, once the game released, the overall response was tough for Neil.
It was weird, and I kind of just put it out my mind every day because I had so many things to do. I wasn't expecting people to care as much as they did, and to be honest, it just came at a really weird time. Like, if it came out a month later, I don't think anyone would have cared as much, but there was a lot of stuff going on in the country at the time, and a lot of people just kind of looking for a game with a black hero that wasn't kind of negative or anything like that, or fed into any stereotypes. So I was kind of at the right place at the right time, and I knew it at the time too. So whenever people would kind of like give me too much praise, I would feel a little uncomfortable with it. And you know, there were other people who were doing a lot more in the game industry than I'd had at that time. And I was just trying to kind of just make my game and get it out the door. It was very stressful, a lot, and I felt a lot of pressure to speak for people who I did not know or didn't know if they wanted me speaking for them. So I was just trying to keep it to my game and to say, these are the reasons I make this game. This is about me, this is not about anybody else. And I'm not trying to speak for anybody else. So I did a lot of interviews talking about how I'm not speaking for anybody but myself. And in that Nintendo World intro that I did, you know, a lot of people who read that script was like, this is what you want to say? And, you know, I wanted to put it out there. I wanted to let people know, you know, I made my own space. I made this for me, for the people who rock with the things I'm trying to make, and just like make that very clear to let people know that the game industry has problems. I could have been working at a giant studio. I would have loved to be doing that, but I had to make my own way to kind of even be a part of this thing.
By the end of it all, Never Yield was a success, but thanks to the publisher agreement and taxes, Neil still had to go get a regular job. While Neil had started working at Unity, he wanted to do an update to Never Yield. You see, a few people thought the story was confusing, and obviously, like most games, there were bugs and glitches that needed to be fixed. So Neil worked with a company called BetaJester to release Never Yield Da Update. Da Update included not only UI and graphical enhancements, but also new levels, an endless runner mode, bug fixes, and most importantly, a story update, one that teased what was coming next for Aerial Knight and Never Yield. After Unity went through a major restructuring causing Neil to get laid off, Neil decided to go all in on a Never Yield sequel.
So I was always kind of like concepting and trying to figure out what a good follow-up to Never Yield would be. And over that time, I was just getting better at everything because, you know, Never Yield was my first time doing all of those things, from cutscenes to like kind of just building out a whole game. And I would talk to Dan all the time, and we would say we would do it so much better if we got a chance to like do a sequel or do a remaster or anything like that. Bad stuff happened at Unity. They had to lay off a bunch of people. So I pitched the follow-up to the publisher, and they was like, yeah, go for it. So I got to build out a little team, and we Never Yield.
The main idea behind the sequel was not only to expand the story and the lore of the main characters, but also allow people to play together. A split-screen co-op game where people could play by themselves with one controller or decide to share a controller is how the game started to come to life.
Going into We Never Yield, we had a clear timeline. I worked with BetaJester, and we gave ourselves pretty much 12 months to make this whole game. The reason it was so short was because we was basing it off of the first game, which, you know, the mechanics were already done, a lot of those systems were already set up. So we thought we already had a giant leap forward. It was a co-op that you could also play by yourself. You know, one controller can control both characters, and you can share that one controller with the person sitting next to you. Or if they brought in their own controller, you can split the controls that way. So balancing it was a bit difficult, like explaining it to people who never even played the first game. It was kind of hard to get them to wrap their mind around, you know, one controller controlling two characters. I think it's a little ahead of its time. People aren't used to kind of like that kind of control system. But I think one day people are gonna circle back and be like, oh, this is really, really different. The story came from a lot of feedback and a lot of comments about the first game. You know, people liked the gameplay, but didn't really understand the story. We try to do it without words so that it can be universal. So anywhere you played in the world, wherever you spoke, you could still understand what was going on with the story. But a lot of people still wasn't rocking with it because it left a lot of confusion and vagueness. So I started this one with a very condensed story. This is a very simple story, a reason why they were in this kingdom, a reason why they had to work together now, and a dope, meaningful ending.
Actually releasing We Never Yield, however, was its own challenge. With multiple platforms, a rolling launch, and a larger team, things weren't quite as smooth as they could have been.
Releasing We Never Yield was very stressful, even more so than the first game, because passing certification ran into so many issues. We tried to launch on multiple platforms at the same time. Some things would be working perfectly on one system, and then on the other system it'd be completely broken, and then when we would do a fix and it would switch. So we just ran into so many certification issues at the end, but we had to push out a patch immediately afterwards, as well as it was a rolling launch. So it didn't come out on everything at the same time like we had planned. So it was a really rough launch. So we kind of just like fell back and tried to figure out how we can continue to keep making the game great and what else we could do to kind of like make sure the players had a good time. We Never Yield is way better than Never Yield because it offers a co-op experience. A big thing of Never Yield was that you couldn't play with somebody else. And I would get a lot of emails from parents saying they loved like playing it with their kids. You know, they would hand the controller back and forth. So that was like the whole concept of We Never Yield. And it like explained the story of the first game without you having to play the first game. The art was 1,000 times better because I actually had time to like focus on that and not have to do art and code and marketing all at the same time. Dan took a lot of lessons from Never Yield. We did a lot of different musical styles, and we got to reach out to a lot of artists to kind of like record vocals on top of tracks, as well as voiceovers. A lot of people who rocked with the first game, who always wanted to do voice acting, we reached out to and said, we saw how much you love the first game, you know the lore, do you want to be a part of this? And they were super excited. So we had an all-black voice cast, all-black musicians. The art team was pretty much just me and maybe one other person helping out with doing animations. So it was pretty much an all-black art team. All around, more people, not just me. And I got to kind of like share the workload and share the credit.
And unfortunately, We Never Yield didn't have quite the reception that Never Yield had. When you're not a well-known studio with a huge marketing budget, people might not know when your next game is releasing. We Never Yield did hit the objective of making everything better. Unfortunately though, just because a game is better, smoother, and more complete than its predecessor doesn't automatically mean it's going to be more successful. Although We Never Yield had a rough launch and didn't do quite as well as Neil had hoped, I mean, come on, you always think your next thing is going to be better than the last. Neil wasn't quite done, and he began to conceptualize his next big step and his next game. One of the challenges Neil faced after launching Never Yield and working on We Never Yield, other than publisher relations and rights issues regarding the games, was that he had to rebuild a community. Starting over with telling people and the world that he's got a new game coming out, We Never Yield was a part of the IGN First program and live stream, but that live stream happened at the same time as Summer Games Fest, which also had quite a few eyeballs on it. So, after We Never Yield, to help support continued development of projects and foster a community, Neil created a Patreon and a Discord, allowing people who enjoyed his games to actively support development by subscribing for behind-the-scenes looks at development, give feedback, and even vote on what should be in what he was developing. While creating this community in Discord, Neil had started to work on 3 separate prototypes: Snapback, Click Game, and a first-person shooter. The shooter was originally conceptualized as a sort of on-rails shooter where you get dropped out of a plane and are tasked with shooting enemies on your way down. Neil discussed the prototypes and the shooter with Dan, along with his Patreon and Discord community. Dan liked the concept a lot, and the community Neil had fostered liked it too.
DropShot is this cool game where we take a bunch of characters, we toss them out of a plane, and they try to take each other out on the way down. And you have boss battles where you take on dragons and tanks and other flying enemies, as well as different modes where you can have race modes and take on different enemies in different ways. Well, initially, when we first announced, that we were going to work on DropShot, as well as the other prototypes that we had put together for the Discord, and they kind of pretty much picked DropShot and said this is the best one. There was a lot of engagement because everything was new and exciting. So we're really looking forward to launching to see if that attention sticks, to see if people come back to be more interactive with what we're trying to do. But development timelines are long, so we're looking forward to seeing what happens and letting other game devs know kind of what our findings are so they can kind of make the best choice to support their games.
One thing that was really different about DropShot specifically was the fact that Neil did not want to work with an outside publisher. While he had worked with a publisher for Neveryield and had kind of worked with one for We Never Yield, there were things that kind of made the situation go sour. And so instead, he decided to forego the entire process, create his Discord, create his community, and release this game on his own. To quote the Kotaku article that Neil interviewed with, to fully explain his decision to eschew a publisher deal, he cited a quote from Lisa's Left Eye Lopez of the popular girl group TLC. In a 1999 episode of VH1's Behind the Music, Lopez explained how she and her bandmates were broke after selling 10 million records. That means that every time an album gets sold, TLC gets 0.56 cents. So 10 million records, 5.6 million seems like a lot of money. Well, it's not a lot of money when the record company spent $3 million to record your album. And in the record business, we pay all costs back to the record company. We paid recording costs and video costs, so now we have 2.6 million left. Well, guess what? When you have that much money, you're in about the 47% tax bracket. So that immediately gets deducted to 1.3 million, said Lopez. And while the choice to forego a publisher may seem weird in today's economy and in today's overall gaming landscape, especially considering it's more work for the development team up front, if the title sells even 10,000 copies, which sounds like it's not a lot, but in reality it is, that would be enough to fund his next slate of titles. Being able to work nimbly without the pressure of a publisher is also something that attracts Neil a lot. Neveryield and DropShot both were developed in less than a year, and that would be a lot harder if he had a publisher breathing down his neck the entire time. Unfortunately, in an unexpected turn of events, Dan passed away soon after DropShot started development. Instead of just mourning Dan, Neil decided to celebrate his life by immortalizing Dan and what he liked through his new game.
DropShot is pretty much a eulogy to Dan. All the things he loved, like even the character themselves. Like one, it's just like a really cool stylized character. But Dan, whenever he used to create a character in those RPGs, he would pick a character with white hair and weird colored skin. So I thought it would be something really cool that he would like. And then we heavily focus on rock music and doing remixes to his old songs.
The idea that a game can serve as a tribute to a dear friend is, in my opinion, beautiful. Games are art. Games are expressions of who we are and what we love and care for. And that's especially true in how Neil continues to develop and create his games. For example, quoted in a Kotaku article released a few days before the game released, DropShot is of course a single-player FPS, but Neil admits in this article that he is not a fan of guns, so he decided to have Smoke, the main character, shoot with finger guns so he wouldn't have to model any guns for the hero. And it pushes further that Neil just wants to create his own things. Quote, "Now this was going to be my take on a shooter. How would I make a shooter? But I hate guns. There's a lot of stuff you can do outside of adding guns. We have this one power-up, you destroy a dragon egg and get power-ups, and he has 8 arms come out, turning into a Gatling gun of finger blasts. So we're just trying to be as creative as possible to kind of negate the violence of it all," he explains. "I didn't want to model a gun. I modeled it for the enemies and whatnot. So it wasn't against making guns, it was just the main character. I was thinking it's so boring to just put a gun in his hand." As development continued, Neil took a few things he learned from not only Neveryield, but also We Never Yield into development. DropShot is a smaller team, has had a smoother development cycle, reuses as much as possible, and continues the trend of Neil wanting to develop games in a tight, reasonable timeline, something that is kind of counterculture in today's video game climate.
I got to keep my timeline short because I got a short attention span, and I got a lot of games I want to make. I don't see myself doing this forever. A lot of people spend 5-6 years on a game just to launch one game that might be successful. I'd rather launch 8 and one of them or 2 of them be successful and be someone's favorite game. I think that's a lot more productive and creative on my end.
In talking with other people around Neil, specifically other developers he's worked with, I learned that the idea behind it all is to create as many prototypes as possible. In this case, 3, and then choose the one that is most interesting. In fact, Neil says that he has a book with all of his game design ideas. That's where he would share with Dan, talk about what new games he might come up with. And so anything in that book at any time could be Neil's next game. Something that's very important to smaller developers, especially on a quicker timeline, is feedback. Not only feedback from Neil's community that he's fostered, but in-person, real-life feedback is helpful too. For instance, at GDEX 2025, which is where I met Neil in person to do our interview, GDEX was a prime opportunity for people to play test DropShot, in addition to a hotspot for marketing and networking, all of which Aerial Knight has to do as a smaller developer.
We are in Columbus, Ohio at GDEX, an expo that highlights indie game development, as well as, Artist Alley and a bunch of cool things. And we get to watch a lot of talks as well. If it hits at the right moment of development, where I can actually get some valuable feedback, or before we're about to do a big push to the public, I think it's really important to put it in front of people to see their actual reactions rather than just get some notes online. GDEX has been amazing for having people sit down and play the game and me watch them fail in different ways and come up with solutions and fixes for the future demos.
And while we were there, in fact, right after we conducted our sit-down interview, Neil happened to win an award.
Well done.
Now, a few months later, DropShot is ready to release on February 17th, 2026. So what's next for Aerial Knight?
Launching DropShot, it's been the smoothest launch that I've had. It's just kind of mixed in with a lot of extra stuff. We launched into Game Pass, which gave us a lot bigger of a platform than we were expecting. So we got a lot of eyes on us when we launched. We sent out review codes a month before the game even released, so a lot of the reviewers didn't have the day one patch. I thought it was gonna be more of a preview than a full-on review when we sent out those codes, so that they can take a look at the game and know what to expect. And then once the game launched, they can kind of use their reviews and base it off of new information that they had. But that's not really how it played out. Audience reception is an odd one. I think even with the audience, they have a little mixed feelings about it. We were aiming for a specific person to play the game. So younger crowd and people who just want something chill and laid back. But this kind of fell into the purview of the hardcore gamers. So they have specific requests when it comes to a shooter and something that looks as awesome as our game. I think the marketing and, how I cut trailers and makes things feel so epic, people kind of put it in a different category than what we kind of made the game for. A lot of the super negative comments calm down after we reply to them and say, hey, we're working on it. We're trying our best. It's a day one release. And people really warm up after that and understand that we're a super small team. We pretty much made this game on very little funds. And because of the limited funds, you can't drag things along. You really got to get it out the door. It's still really, really hard to keep people's attention, even if they're fans of your previous work, even if they like the things that you're making. People's lives are really busy, so they can't keep up with everything. We struggle to get people to review the game, positive or negative. Ever since the game launched, I post every day to say, hey, I'm thankful for all the like really nice messages. But if you could take that energy and just put that same message into a review, I'm still going to see it. I promise. We had a really weird window. We had a specific couple of days of us being able to kind of really show our game without anything happening. If you look at the month of February this year, it's just been ridiculous. We had a PlayStation showcase the week before our game launched. We had a Nintendo showcase right before we launched. There's another Nintendo showcase this week. There's a major video game launch this week. We got Resident Evil. At the beginning of the month, there was an Xbox showcase. And what happened 2 days after we launched was Steam Next Fest. So we were surrounded by competition, and we got buried real quick after we launched. I feel great about DropShot. I like that game a lot. Like I think it's not finding its audience right now. I think we have to figure out how to get it in front of people who would love that game. But what's next is, I feel kind of hurt by some of the reactions to it. I feel like all the effort and the hard work and, the long nights I worked on this so hard. And, for someone just to kind of scroll past it and just make a terrible comment, I try not to let it get to me, but sometimes it does.
In Q1 of 2024, there were reportedly over 11 million game developers across the world, and each year, thousands of students graduate ready to enter the workforce, specifically with a degree in game and interactive media design. Not to mention the specific subsections that feed into the game development hiring pool, like computer science, 3D animation, UX and UI design, and many, many more. Even VideoGameDocs was born out of me wanting to pursue a career in video games. I originally went to college for a degree in information technology with a concentration in game design. I wanted to be a level designer, but after facing the job market, I instead started making videos, after I finished my 9-to-5 in marketing, about video games and their history. Something I've had a passion for since I first found out there were games and consoles older than the Nintendo 64. In my conversations with Neil, he's taught me a lot about creativity, self-worth, and the importance of doing what you want to do. As someone who is trying to just do what he wants, the last thing I asked Neil was what his advice was for anyone wanting to get into the games industry, and his answer was very Neil.
My advice to other game developers is not to take people's advice, because everything doesn't work for everybody. Doing what I did won't work for 90% of other people. Everybody has their own experience, they have their own thing, and game development is so massive and has so many different jobs that it's really hard to kind of nail down specifically like the proper advice for one person. But if there is any advice, just make the things that you like and keep making things until something works out.
So I'll leave you with this. In the days of AI-generated content, large companies and publishers telling you what you want, pushing creativity out and profits in, try as best as you can to do what you want. Make cool stuff and just keep doing it. Whether you're super successful or not, it's cool that you even made something. If you made it to the end of this video, you clearly love video games. To support my work, please like and subscribe or watch another video of me that should be showing up on screen now. Thank you to Ariel Knight and all that he has done. He's just a great guy to work with, and it's been a blast collaborating on this project. Neil, if you're watching to the end of this video, I hope I did you justice, man. Please feel free to hop in my DMs after you've watched this and just roast the crap out of me. But anyway, thank you for watching.